talk today about shoulder pain in baseball players. I'm Dr. Danny Lehnert. I'm a physical therapist and owner of Eclipse Wellness in Sterling, Virginia, where I primarily work with baseball athletes. And obviously, a lot of them come to me with shoulder pain from throwing. It happens all the time. I wanted to talk about what I typically do with shoulder pain, a simple solution that's often overlooked, and kind of give you some ideas, exercises, things like that you can work on to prevent shoulder pain, or if you're dealing with a little bit of it, help it out on your own. Obviously, I'd recommend going to see someone, preferably a physical therapist, someone with a medical background who knows what they're doing. But this will just give you some ideas and explain some concepts that I think are important for people to understand. So the first thing I want to talk about is what I typically see in athletes is they'll come in and they'll say, "Oh, my shoulder's been hurting for a few weeks. I went and saw my primary care doctor. The primary care doctor said take a couple weeks off of throwing and then ramp back up." And surprisingly, it didn't hurt when they threw. It didn't hurt when they didn't throw. But when they start throwing again, the pain comes back. So that's not really fixing anything. Let's just kind of put a Band-Aid on it. Now, I do see plenty of athletes who I do advise relative rest, so decreasing your throwing or maybe stopping temporarily. But you have to have a plan. What are you doing during that time? You're not just saying, "I'm not doing anything so it feels better," but then when I ramp back up, it hurts again because I'm not fixing anything. That should be a time to work on exercises, movement, mechanics, things like that. I often see a lot of athletes too, especially in this area, who work with pitching coaches who mean very well, but they're just giving mechanical changes of, "Oh, try to get your arm in this position, do something different in layback." And it's not actually helping. It's just kind of putting slight changes. What you need is a mechanical analysis and understanding of what's going on. That's where physical therapy comes into play, of not just looking at things through a baseball lens, but looking at things through a biomechanical, mobility, health lens. Because as a physical therapist, I'm an expert in how people's bodies move. I just need to put it to use in a baseball specific capacity. How's your shoulder moving? What's it doing? Specifically, what I like to look at is your scapula or your shoulder blade and how that moves. So I want to talk about some basic shoulder anatomy, and then I want to talk about how I specifically look at the scapula, and then also some corrective exercise that I like to use to get it moving again and to help decrease that shoulder pain with throwing. So talking about the anatomy of the shoulder. So your shoulder is technically your glenohumeral joint, is the main joint of the shoulder we're talking about. Your humerus is the big bone in your upper arm here. Your glenoid is your glenoid fossa. It's the cutout of your scapula that your shoulder sits in here. So a lot of people, what they think is going on, because your shoulder is what's called a ball and socket joint. So it's a ball inside of a socket that moves around. We have more mobility in our shoulder than any other joint in the body. That's how we can go all the way up here, all the way back here, things that we couldn't do with like our elbow, even our hip, anything like that. So what a lot of people are told is the ball and socket concept. So this is the humerus inside the glenoid fossa. Now that's not actually the case of what's really going on. The glenoid fossa is much smaller than that. It's more analogous to this, where this is the only glenoid fossa here. This is the humerus, and then you have a bunch of muscles and things that are holding everything in place. Your rotator cuff, your pecs, your biceps. There's a bunch of muscles in there. Your shoulder relies on muscle more than any other joint in the body. That's how it's so loose and able to do as much as it wants to, but it puts it in a little bit more precarious of a position. So I think the important thing to understand is that the glenoid fossa comes from the scapula or the shoulder blade. That's kind of what dictates where you are in space with your shoulder and everything like that. So if I'm elevating my shoulder like this, my scapula should be rotating around to let that happen, to keep it on a solid base. If my scapula stays down, it doesn't rotate up like that. So what I like to look at in athletes with throwing pain, specifically baseball players, is how is your scapula moving? Because a lot of times what I will see is athletes who they're pinched, they're in a position that's uncomfortable, and it's because their scapula isn't moving, and they don't realize that necessarily, where they're looking at their shoulder mobility, they're stretching, they're doing everything they can, maybe their physical therapist or the baseball coach is looking at their shoulder, move, move, move. It's not getting any better with all this mobility stuff. What's really happening is your scapula or shoulder blade isn't moving to let your ball have a solid base point to spin off of and move to let movement happen. So maybe that's limiting performance, maybe that's causing pain. So now I want to talk about specifically looking at the baseball throw and what I see and how I analyze it with respect to the scapula, the shoulder blade, and how it's moving when we throw a baseball. So in looking at the scapula and its relation to the shoulder with throwing, obviously throwing a baseball is a bit of an unnatural movement. Your shoulder's in different positions than it typically is. That's what causes wear and tear. But the important thing to understand is what movements are required with throwing. Now, the position that typically causes the most issue for the shoulder is what's called layback. So when you're maximally externally rotated, abducted back here, when I have the ball all the way back here before I start to come forward as I'm releasing. Now, in that position, what can often happen is if your scapula is not able to move back or retract towards your spine there, it's not able to upwardly rotate or extend with your thoracic spine and your ribs there, what happens is you can get a little bit stuck and you get what's called internal impingement. So if I'm here and I'm not able to retract all the way back here and I try to rotate back, what's happening is the back of my rotator cuff is pinching a little bit against the back of my humerus up here because I'm not able to put it in a good position to get set. So if you do this over and over again, you start to get pain in the back of your shoulder blade. Now imagine doing that throwing a baseball as hard as you can over and over again. You're going to wear down and cause pain, weakness, loss of control, things like that. This can be health issues. This can also be performance issues where your body's not able to execute the pitches in the way that you want. That can be a sign as well of issues, more so than just pain. So what we want to look at with the scapula is that you can effectively retract it back to get it in that position and also extend it, upwardly rotate it a little bit so that you're sitting on a good plane where instead of rotating through here, I'm rotating back here and all of a sudden I have more movement. The example I like to use for people to understand that concept is, the simplest one is if I'm hunched forward and I have terrible posture and I try to reach up, my arms get stuck about here because my shoulder blade is not moving to allow me to get upward. If I try to go further, I'm just putting stress on my shoulder and doing that. However, if I stand up, nice and straight here, extended, I can go all the way up here, no issues. Similarly, if I'm in this flex position and I try to rotate back like this, I can feel pinching almost immediately in the back of my rotator cuff here, that internal impingement, versus if I'm back here and pulling myself back here, all of a sudden I have more movement there. So it seems very simple in looking at it on a table or standing here, but obviously we have to execute on the mount when we're moving really, really fast, throwing really hard, thinking of a million different things, the batter, runners, fielders, things like that. And so my goal as a physical therapist is give you the opportunity for that movement to occur by working on some exercises in the clinic that then turn into, okay, I've got the mobility here, we gradually load it, we gradually move in different ways, okay, now it starts to appear on the field. So I want to talk through a few exercises that I really like regarding thoracic mobility, rib mobility, scapular mobility, because the scapula sits right on the rib cage here. So if you're able to rotate through your thoracic spine, you have a lot more movement here. If your thoracic spine is really stiff, or your ribs are really stiff, it's a lot harder to move that scapula. So we want to be looking at moving through our thoracic spine, our rib cage, our scapula, and that can take a lot of pressure off of the shoulder itself and hopefully help that pain to go down as well as improve performance on the mount. So let's look at a few exercises that I like to use with my athletes at Eclipse Wellness. So this first exercise is for thoracic mobility. It's known as an open book. So what you're going to do is you're going to lay on your side, you're going to bend your knees up, keep them together, you're going to have your head resting comfortably on a pillow, arms out in front of you. You're going to separate your hands and rotate as far as you can to the far side. You're going to turn your neck and head to follow. You're going to keep your knees together. You should feel a stretch through your mid-back, maybe your pec when you do this. When you get to the end, keeping your arm out here and looking, you're going to try to take a few deep breaths in that position, trying to reach a little bit further with each exhale, and then you're going to come back. You're going to do about 10 of those on one side and flip over and do 10 of those on the other to loosen up the thoracic spine and the mid-back. So your pecs are important muscles in the front of your chest, your pec major and pec minor. Those connect through the front of your arm. They attach to your rib cage, your clavicle, your scapula. They're all over the place in holding you in this position that might limit you getting your scapula back into position for throwing like we've talked about. So a lot of people know how to do a pec stretch, but they don't know how to do it correctly. So what you want to do is you want to go up on the wall here, aiming for about 90 degrees where you're feeling the best stretch is what I usually tell people to do. And so you want your arm fully supported on the wall here. You want to be looking straight ahead. What I like to do is have people stagger their feet. I don't care which foot is forward. Usually it's easier if the foot that's further away is forward because that'll give you a little bit more stretch. And what you want to think about doing is tucking your pelvis under you so that you're nice and straight. The mistake I see a lot of people make is that they become very extended through here and they're just stretching through their back and everything, and they're actually losing the mobility through their pec. So you want to be nice and straight here as if my body was a straight line, and then just sliding your weight forward like you're doing almost a lunging type movement, sliding through here, stretching through here. Once again, really good to take deep breaths in this position because we're trying to stretch the rib cage here. So as we're exhaling, we're trying to get a little more push as those ribs depress to get a little more stretch on the pec through there to really loosen it up and hopefully get that shoulder blade moving for when you're throwing. So the next exercise that's great for scapular mobility is a loaded mobility exercise, rows. So rows are fantastic for building back strength and everything like that. They're also great for scapular mobility if done correctly. So I love to do rows on bench here, one arm straight, other knee up, this leg straight. I'm grabbing the weight here. What you want to focus on is coming all the way down, fully letting your shoulder blade or scapula wrap around your body, pulling from your shoulder blade, pulling all the way up, and then coming all the way down again. And so when you're doing that, you should feel that scapula moving around your body. That's the primary thing driving the movement. That'll work on that mobility of getting much better at retracting it actively, but also passively getting a good stretch through there to help with reaching. And that'll help loosen that scapula up to put your shoulder in a better position when you're throwing. So the last exercise I want to discuss when it comes to working on scapular mobility is the most throwing specific of them all, and that's actually throwing. So it can help to use a plyo ball or other weighted baseball to kind of feed the mistake that you're feeling. So what I mean by that is I'm using a 1,000-gram ball here, and so if I'm someone who struggles to get my scapula back and I try to throw, I'm going to feel that pinch there when I get to here when I have a heavier ball than I would with a lighter ball. So it's going to remind me I need to be back here as I'm throwing and working on that mobility. So part of your warm-up can obviously be exercises like we talked about, rows, open books, pec stretches, things like that. But then when we're actually throwing, starting with a heavier ball can help us work on getting back into that position as we're releasing to kind of stretch those muscles, give a little extra force to get a little extra stretch back there, and then gradually decreasing the weight of the ball so that we're transferring this into, okay, now I have a lighter ball, more baseball weight as part of my warm-up and throwing routine. Now, I feel like people often sleep on using weighted baseballs or plyo balls for corrective exercise. It's a really great tool that, like I said, is the most specific thing you're going to do is actually throwing. And so it's good to try to manipulate how you're throwing with different constraints like weighted baseballs to try and get the result and then take that into throwing regular ball. What am I feeling with the heavier ball? Let's try to replicate that. Okay, I understand how it feels like to open up here, retract my scapula. Now I'm going to do that with a regular baseball. So those are kind of 4 exercises that I like to use with things. Now let's talk real quick about a summary and kind of take home points. So that is a very brief summary of how I look at the scapula and its relationship to shoulder pain, specifically with baseball pitchers and throwing athletes. I think it's important to remember 2 things from all this. One, there's a saying from a famous scientist, Carl Lewitt, he who treats the site of pain is lost. So it's important to understand, just because your shoulder hurts or your shoulder hurts back here does not mean it's a shoulder issue necessarily. It could be. Could also be that it's your scapula, could be your thoracic spine, your rib cage, heck, it could be your neck, could be things we haven't even talked about today. So that's the importance of taking a wide look, casting a wide net. And that's the mistake I see a lot of athletes make, but also physical therapists, healthcare providers, baseball coaches, is they get laser focused on the one thing that's hurting. And we're stretching the shoulder. The whole time their thoracic spine was tight and they totally missed it. And so you're wasting time doing exercises that don't help you and you're not getting better and you're getting frustrated, you're losing momentum. You don't want that, especially in season. The other thing I would recommend is getting an individualized assessment. This is all very general guidelines. I gave you 4 exercises. These are 4 exercises that I do think are beneficial, but what's most beneficial is getting exercises that work for you. So find someone, preferably a medical professional who knows about baseball, that can look at things through both lenses, the medical professional, the anatomy, the physiology, the biomechanics and everything, but also a baseball coach, someone like that who's around the game who understands the unique demands of it. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, obviously we're here in Sterling, Virginia at Eclipse Wellness. We are always taking new clients, even if it's just for assessments, just to kind of figure out what's going on, give you a workout plan, something to do this off season. We've made a couple posts about off-season workouts, how assessments work, everything like that. So go back and look at those videos if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you for watching and I really appreciate it.